If you're thinking about getting started in RC dirt oval racing, it's going to be really important that you choose the right first car to get started with. You definitely don't want to do what I did because, yeah, I went out and bought a car without going to my local track first because I thought it was a really good deal. And then when I got to the track, I found out they didn't have a class for that car. But instead of admitting my mistake, I didn't want to waste money, so I kept trying to modify that car to force it to fit into one of the classes that they ran. But obviously that didn't work. It was never going to work. So I ended up having to go back and buy a new car, but then I'd wasted all that money on extra modifications and things. So by not going to the track, all that really did was it left me really frustrated. It wasted a ton of time before I started actually having fun. And oddly enough, by trying to save money, I ended up wasting a lot of money. So what I decided to do was to create a series of videos to help you learn the things that I wish I had known when I got started in the hobby. And the idea behind these is going to be to take you from where you're at to having fun on the track as quickly as we possibly can. So this first video is going to be about the 3 questions that you have to ask before you buy your first car. And in my opinion, if you don't know the answer to all 3 questions, then you really shouldn't be buying a car yet. The first question you have to ask yourself is, what classes do they run at your local track? So what you need to do is go to your local track on a race night before you've bought your first car. Okay, and you're just going to go there and you want to ask a ton of questions so you make sure that you're as familiar with the classes they run as possible. And then you want to ask about which classes are beginner friendly, because there are going to be different tiers of classes where some are super complicated and a little more expensive, and some are easier to get into. So you want to make sure you know which classes are best for you to choose. I know this sounds super simple and obvious, but you cannot skip this step. Obviously, that's a mistake that I made. I know a few other guys that have made the same mistake, but here's the deal. It doesn't matter how cool the car is that you buy or how fast it is. If they don't have a class for it at your local track, you're not going to have anywhere to race it. The second question you want to ask yourself before you buy a car is, what are the core classes at your track? So which are the classes that have been around for a few years and everybody expects to be there for several more years? Because one of the really bizarre things to me about RC dirt oval racing is that you'll have these classes that sort of just pop up out of nowhere, and guys will think they're super cool, and so everybody will build a car for it, and it'll have these huge car counts for a few races, and then just a couple months later it'll die out as fast as it popped up. So while you're at the track, you want to ask which classes have been around for a long time and which do they expect to be around for the next few years, because you want to make sure that you have enough time with the first car that you buy to learn everything that you need to know before you move on to a more advanced class. All right, the third question you have to ask yourself before you buy a car is, what is your budget? Okay? If there's anything that I have learned from racing RC cars over the last few years, it's that it doesn't matter what type of racing you're in, okay? It could be slot car racing, it could be boat racing, Formula One, drag racing, whatever it is. You cannot compete unless you have quality equipment. If your car isn't at least comparable to the other guys that you're racing with, you're not going to be fast and you're not going to win. So for example, you could take the fastest driver at your track and give them garbage equipment. They're not going to be the fastest person there anymore. So when you're starting to think about which car you want to buy, make sure that you pick a class that your budget can accommodate, okay? RC racing can be super expensive, but it doesn't have to be, okay? There are some beginner-friendly classes that you can get into and put a competitive car on the track for, $600 or less. So it doesn't have to mean that you break the bank, but it does mean that you want to think about how much you're willing to invest, because if you're thinking, oh, I could get into, and this is whether it's your beginner car or as you start to move up and build different cars, if you're thinking, oh, I could build this car, but I'm just going to cut this corner or that corner to make it work, don't. It doesn't work. You have to have quality equipment, and whether that's tools, whether that's your chassis or your tires, if you don't have quality equipment, you can't compete. So before you buy your car, make sure that it's at a price point that you feel like you can continue to keep to put quality equipment on the track so that you can have fun. I'll wrap this up by giving you my best advice for buying your first RC dirt oval car. Obviously, you want to make sure that you can answer all 3 of the questions that we just went over, and then you want to make sure that you listen to the guys at your track about which classes are beginner friendly. Okay, you're going to see some really fast, super fun looking cars at the track, but you have to resist the urge to jump over the beginner classes and just go straight into the faster classes. Nearly any track you go to is going to have a beginner class where the cars are just a little bit slower and a little bit more forgiving. And in those classes, guys are going to be a little bit more patient when you make beginner mistakes. Okay, you want to start in that division and learn how to drive the car, learn the rules of the track, and all those types of things. In those higher classes, guys are starting to take things a little bit more seriously, and they've got a lot of money in those cars. So they aren't going to have a real good sense of humor with you making, beginner mistakes or not being able to hold a line and things like that. So just trust the guys that have been there before. You want to start in a beginner class and learn how to drive the car before you get into those, faster, more advanced classes. And then the last thing is, once you are ready to buy your car, please buy it at your local track hobby shop. If we don't support the places where we race, they're not going to make enough money to stay in business, and then they close. And then it doesn't matter what car you bought because you're not going to have anywhere to race. So one way or another, find a way to support your local track.